So hi everyone. So I'm Chris Warburton from Arum, and I'm here today to just talk a little bit about open finance and APIs, and talk a bit about some of the trends that we've been seeing, and then what that means really from a transformation opportunity for the industry. So before I start, just a very few words really around Arum. So Arum, we're an advisory company and a consulting company, specializing largely in collections and recoveries, but looking really across the whole credit life cycle. And what we specialize in is either strategy consulting, operational type consulting, sort of like that advisory element, but then also around the technology side of things and the implementation of technology, like how that can be used to improve the business as well. So, so that's really what we do. And I say here, I'm going to talk a little about some of the things that we've seen in the industry over the last few years. So if I just go to the next slide, I wanted to start off with a bit of perspective, I suppose, and the perspective really was around, what have we seen change over the last 10 odd years. So if we go to the old world and the old world of what business used to look like, I mean, very much we used to sit in a world where everything was sort of held internally within the company. We used to have the systems were held internally, the operations was held internally, and we used to try and own all of our processes as much as we could. And what we've seen over the last 10 odd years is really sort of this migration to a much more sort of distributed type of infrastructure. So we've seen cloud technology come in. We've seen letters. We used to be letters based. We're now using much more sort of like digital type of processes. We've even seen sort of our operations teams gradually starting. There's been a trend around outsourcing where that's been moved outside of the company, and sort of you have business process outsourcers basically working accounts. And then the other thing that we've seen is really around our applications. So the applications we'd run our business on, we're now actually starting to see those get much more distributed, and actually those sitting outside of the company as well. And we're using that as almost like a software as a service. So those are the trends we've kind of seen, and I'd say that from a data infrastructure point of view, I think the cloud has been sort of relatively well established. This software as a service has definitely been a trend over the last few years, and people now are very much sort of picking the best in class that they possibly can, be it from customer service, operations programs, collections programs, decisioning programs. Collections and contact kind of channels. Software as a service has definitely been a theme. The drive to digital has definitely been a theme, as has staffing consolidation as well. And what we've seen is really over the last sort of 12-18 months, particularly as a result of the pandemic, is a lot of these things were in place before, but now what we're starting to see is there's been acceleration of that. So, whilst before a lot of people were saying, well, look, this sounds interesting, but we're not quite sure if it's ready for us yet. Really what the pandemic has done is forced our hands to say, well, look, the technology's out there, let's utilize this, really, really while we can, and really as a necessity to kind of do business. And that's I think is really the question really around, so are we now at a turning point? So are these new things that are out there, or is this, something that's existing? I think it's these things have been around for a while, but we are at a bit of a turning point, and I think COVID has kind of helped us sort of reach that, which is really what we've seen over the last 12 months is really an acceleration of some of those trends. So the trends have sort of accelerated as we've sort of gone through a digital kind of journey over the last 12 months. What we have seen is, as we've seen a wider adoption from a digital application point of view, is we've seen in digital transformation, we've seen greater integration between apps. And so we're starting to see, as the technology is starting to embed, people are finding new uses and new cases for APIs. I mean, a good example of that that I thought I'd mention, I was actually on a call last week, and we're talking, for example, around it was around brokers and dealers, and like how do you now integrate the information that's gathered from an initial call all the way through the process, and not only just within different departments, or within different parts within the same company, also exchanging data between different organizations as well. And so that data and information flows is now being enabled. And I think what we're seeing over the last sort of 12 months is how can that now further embed and generate even like further efficiencies from exchanging data and information. So I think the technology is embedding, but we're finding new cases all the time. The other trend I think we're sort of seeing is really that, we are still seeing that some companies are in a bit of a holding pattern. This technology is there, it's being adopted, new cases are coming up, but some people are still holding back and saying, well, look, let's wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see how this starts to roll out. And so while some companies are definitely on the front foot with this, I think some are still playing a bit of a wait and see kind of strategy. And I think what's that's leading to, particularly over the last sort of like 6 months or so, is as more and more people adopted, there's only so much capacity that's available really to try and implement some of this new digital technology. And so we're starting to see, will there be queues that basically come up for actually implementing it when people decide it. So I think it's sort of being early and being ahead is probably a key theme that's definitely out there. So just to drill down on a couple of things that we've kind of seen, I suppose, specific examples that we've seen. So 4 themes I think I wanted to talk through. First was really around the collection system technology. So, we obviously spend a lot of time working in the collections and recovery space. We're definitely seeing that as, from an API and a technology point of view, being a key theme in terms of like there being new technology out there and people looking around, can we actually use and leverage new functionality within new systems? The other theme we've seen is definitely been around proliferation of contact channels and really particularly around new channel availability, on digital communication and moving away from old traditional telephony-based channels or even letters as well. So that's definitely a trend. The third one is then really around decision-based using data to really make decisions. All of these channels basically drop data, and there's a proliferation of data out there. And lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing landscape, because it's not just us who are looking at digital and what APIs, how APIs are enabling digital interaction. It's also the regulators are looking at it as well, and the government's been looking at it as well. So I think there's a bit of an external changing context there as well. So what are some of the changes and opportunities that we've seen really from a collection system technology point of view? So undoubtedly, APIs, the exchange of data is really and really the lower cost of processing is really enabling new nimble entrants into the marketplace. So we've seen, there's plenty of established players, but there's also the cost of entry has been lowered, and that means that there's a proliferation of new types of vendors out there providing new functionality. With that, we're also been seeing like a trend in terms of like some of the lower price points as well. So not only are we seeing like new features coming on board, we're also seeing that at different price points, and the implementation timeframes have been reducing as well. So it's been a great time to be in the market for new collection systems. And getting those implemented. I mean, that has undoubtedly put pressure on the industry from a competition point of view, but that's been great from from a customer point of view. So, and a lot of people have sort of been saying, well, look, all of these vendors are out there, and how do I now use multiple vendors and especially take best in class modules for the features I actually want and integrate that into my processes? And that's caused a little bit of sort of technology fragmentation, where you might say, well, I'm going to take the best sort of decisioning module, I'm going to take the best contact module, I'm going to take the best user experience from an agent point of view, and knit that together. And you can do that these days with the API technology and the technology that's out there as well. But all of this is basically creating additional functionality that's available from a customer point of view at different price points. And then the last kind of trend that we've seen is there's definitely a move really with I suppose some of the online sort of user experience really to sort of move towards this like self-configuration. So in the old world, it used to be very much you'd ask the vendor to configure it, or you'd have an IT team to configure it in the background. There's definitely a trend and a theme that we're seeing, which is really around configuration by super users or by internal teams rather than external teams. So all of this, certainly from a collections and recoveries technology point of view, is adding to basically the market's been thrown up in the air, and you're getting a lot of new features for and a sort of a widening of the capabilities that are available in the market for you. in terms of contact channels, I'd say that's the other trend and theme that we've seen. I mean, certainly during lockdown, there's been huge amounts of expansion in terms of digitalization. I mean, a lot of people were reliant on call centers. And call centers, being a group of people who are in the same building, have been under huge amounts of pressure with lockdown. And even as customers, we had difficulties actually going to visit showrooms or visit buildings as well. So we've all been reliant on self-serve. We've all been reliant on digital platforms to basically continue the business that we would normally use, including working from home as well. So definitely, we've seen an investment in digital platforms, self-serve platforms, and really sort of like with that has become accessing new channels. So a lot of companies have been investing in implementing new channels, such as messaging channels, has been particularly exciting. So either from an email, digital self-serve websites, but also messaging, and particularly asynchronous messaging, I think has been particularly interesting, which is using things like Messenger or WhatsApp, or iMessage. There's a variety of them out there, and having this two-way conversation, almost like chat conversation, going on through mobile phones and the app. So that's sort of given us a proliferation really of different ways of contacting customers, and it allows us to basically contact customers at different times of the day, using different methods, and getting towards this sort of omni-channel kind of infrastructure. And so the last sort of 9-12 months, we've sort of seen a wider adoption of that technology. And the good thing about the digital technology, and it's all enabled by basically APIs, because you can embed it within your systems. But the good thing about this is it also gives us access to new data as well. So as we've seen companies starting to implement this, they're getting access to different types of contact data, different types of usage data, and that's allowing them to basically build new contact analytics around when's the best time to call people, what's the best channel to call people, what do they mean when they're actually interacting with people, text analysis, those kind of things. The third and fourth change I was going to talk about that we've seen is really around, I suppose, database decision making, and then the changing landscape. And I'd say that from a data point of view, as we've moved into this much more sort of like digital type of world, over the last few months, each of these systems, as they get implemented, basically drop data. I mean, they drop data all the way through their processes. And we've seen this new wave of data that has basically been introduced across all of the different systems that have been put in. And if you look at the fintech world, I mean, very much, I mean, it's their processes are driven by data. And as you get to access new different types of systems and integrate them into your processes, you also get access to that data as well. And so we're seeing new data sources being available from implementations that are coming through, but there's also new data sources available via direct APIs as well. So open banking, which we will have talked about already today, is one. The other one that was on the title of this topic here was around open finance. So those are quite exciting data sources that are available, that can be used to then further analyze what the state of the customer is. And it's really all around, the opportunity here is really all around better understanding the customer and getting better customer outcomes as well. And then lastly, I was just going to talk a bit about the changing landscape that this technology is sort of really enabling, not just for us, but also for regulators as well. So a couple of things that are definitely on the horizon for us here. One is around breathing space. So again, that's enabled by APIs. The new debt moratorium that's coming out in May is really, all of the data is getting centralized via the insolvency service. And again, it's requiring an interface into that in order to then get the feed to then come back. So it's not just us that are thinking about this new technology. It's also the government and the HMRC changes that are coming up as well. So I think not only on the radar should we have what can we use this technology for in terms of, looking at new systems and new technology, we should also start to think about and just be aware of it can be used from interfacing from government services and a compliance point of view as well. So it's been a huge changing world, I think, over the last accelerated over the last, what, 12 months or so, but it's not without challenges as well. And I think some of the challenges that come up from the new world and the new sort of distributed technology world, the first one then is really around data. And I think, the challenge that definitely we've been seeing is there's so much data out there, and it's very easy to get lost within understanding what that data is, and really understanding what the analysis is. And it's really around sort of staying focused, not getting lost in the data, making sure that any analysis or research that you're done to really understand the customer is really actionable as well. And it's really around just staying focused on what the end goal is and sort of creating processes and really understanding what the use case is. There's just huge amounts of data, and it's just really around just staying focused. The other challenge then is really around managing the complexity. So as we've seen the systems sort of proliferate with lots of different sort of, taking best of breed from each of the different areas, we're seeing many systems and many vendors. And that presents a bit of a problem in terms of like, how do you integrate all of these? So you might have the best in class user experience or agent screens. You might have the best in class decisioning. You might have the best in class messaging systems. You might have the best in class reporting systems, but each of those have to be managed in terms of like, what's the relationship sitting there with the vendor? How is the data then being passed between all the different systems from an API point of view? And that whole IT and technology management is definitely a theme that's upcoming, and it's worth thinking about how is all of this knitted together and integrated. So integration is a challenge that's sort of, that's starting to grow. And then the last challenge I think that's worth being aware of is then just making sure you remain up to date. As I said, it's a very fast and growing market. There's a lot of new entrants, a lot of new feature changes, and it's constantly changing all the time. And it's something that we see a lot. And so one of the considerations you've got to have is, well, what's the resiliency for change? What's the stability of the vendors you might be using? There are new features that are coming out, but you've got to balance everything together. And then understanding, well, then how do each of these applications then also factor in potential compliance or regulatory change down the road as well, because if you build a more complex system, you've got to manage that complexity as well. So I think so in summary, I think from an API point of view, with open finance, open banking being as part of that, I think it's been a boon, I think, over the last sort of year or so, in terms of being a real sort of like case for investment around sort of people improving their digital capability. The API world has definitely enabled that. It's been around for a while, but I think we've almost like seen it accelerate over the last few months. But it does provide opportunities for all of us to sort of start to knit those processes together and start to exchange data, extract the data, and then use that to then come out with better business results. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention today. I really appreciate it, and I know we'll be taking questions later.